CLAS started. Okay, good afternoon, everybody. Bem-vindos, welcome. It's great to see so many new and familiar faces and to welcome everybody today for the second panel on Portuguese. The second panel in our Inclusive Language Across Latin America series, which is sponsored by OSU Center for Latin American Studies, or CLAS. I'm Mark Hoff, Assistant Director of CLAS, and my pronouns are he in English and Eli in Portuguese. And I'm very excited about the conversation we have planned for you today. We have an excellent panel, and we've been looking forward to this for quite some time. So as you may know, this series about inclusive language in Latin America has 3 parts. As I said, this is the second. If you missed our conversation about Spanish that we held on October 15th, that recording is up on our website, and I'd encourage you to check it out. We had a really great conversation with that panel. And then also on November 15th, we'll sort of round out the series with the discussion about 3 indigenous languages of Latin America. We'll have folks talking about Nahuatl, Yucatec Maya, and Quechua. And so you can reach the event page and the registration page for those events from the link for the series that I'll be putting in the chat right here in just a moment. And one of my personal goals for the future programming in CLAS is to sort of amplify diverse voices throughout Latin America and highlight the diversity of the communities that exist in the region. So hopefully today will be just one of many conversations on topics like this and a step in that direction. So thank you all for contributing to that goal. And as I mentioned, we are recording each event. The videos will be available on the website as well as on our YouTube channel. And please feel free to share those videos with anyone you know who wasn't able to attend, or anybody who you think after the fact might be interested in hearing about the series. We're happy to spread the word as much as we possibly can. I'll turn it over to Scott for just a few words, and then I'll come back with you.
Thanks, Mark. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Scott Schwenter. I'm the director of the Center for Latin American Studies at OSU. And this is really Mark's initiative. So all the credit, none of the blame goes to Mark. He just survived a COVID bout, and he's looking strong and ready to take on the inclusive language world yet again. And if you were here for the Spanish panel that we had, it was fantastic. We expect this one to be just as good, if not better. I'm not allowed to say it, but everyone knows Portuguese is my favorite language, and I love Portuguese, and I love to work on Portuguese as much as I love Spanish. Portuguese just a little bit better. So this is going to be my favorite one of the 3. And I'm really looking forward to it. So I want to say thanks to Mark. Thanks to my colleague, Michele Carilo, for being our moderator today. And thanks to the panelists who are coming from far-flung places all over the world. And with that, I will let the panelists take it away.
Yeah, so first let me brag a little bit about Michele, our moderator today. So Michele is our coordinator for the Portuguese language program here at OSU and also a lecturer in Portuguese. She's also a tremendous ally and asset to the Center for Latin American Studies, so she was an obvious choice for today. Michele's research and practice focus on Portuguese as a foreign or additional language, particularly how critical and intercultural pedagogies are applied to Portuguese teaching and learning within multiple contexts for the promotion of pluraliteracies and intercultural awareness. Her latest publications include the chapter Português como língua adicional para hispanofalantes na Ohio State University, uma proposta de educação sob lentes críticas e interculturais. And that's in the volume Perspectivas do Ensino e da Aprendizagem de Português em Universidades nos Estados Unidos, in case you guys want to check it out. Michele is also currently editing a book on best practices and research related to Portuguese as an additional language in multiple sociocultural and linguistic contexts worldwide. And based on those publications, I think it's clear why we chose Michele to represent OSU and to moderate for us today. So thank you, Michele, for sharing your expertise with us and for leading us in what I hope will be a very interactive, informative, open, bilingual, and hopefully code switched conversation. And with that, I'll turn it over to you to introduce the panelists and sort of get us started with the conversation today.
Okay, muito obrigada for all those words. Thank you very much. I appreciate the invitation. I was very happy to be invited for this and very excited. So I'm going to start by apologizing and say that unfortunately, Nilma Dominique could not be here. She was not feeling well and she sent everyone her apologies, and we said it's fine. We are all going through this. As Scott just said, Mark was not feeling well, and we are trying to cope with all those things that happen, and they are unforeseen. So we all wish her well, and she'll probably see this recording. So just give her a wave and say, feel better. Having said that, I'm going to start by introducing Luana Moreira Reis. She is a poet, educator, and a Black feminist scholar. She was born and raised in Feira de Santana, Bahia, and that's why her background is that beauty that you can all see. She is currently a PhD student in literature at the University of Pittsburgh, where she teaches Portuguese and researches contemporary Black women literature and Morenas. As founder and president of the AD Diverse Plus Poesia Collective, she brings writers and audiences together across the hemisphere and using the power of poetry as a vehicle for engaging a range of issues, particularly race and gender, freedom and refuge, and language and identity. So thank you so much, Luana, for being here today. We are so lucky to have you. Our next panelist is Ronald Beline Mendes, and he is full professor of social linguistics at the University of São Paulo, or Universidade de São Paulo. His research focuses on the social meaning of linguistic variation with a special interest in gender and sexuality, and the construction of styles as recurring clusters of multiple linguistic variables. So thank you so much for being here as well, Ronald. Our next panelist is Carlos Pio. So Carlos Pio holds a PhD in Hispanic languages and literature with emphasis in medieval studies from the University of California, Santa Barbara. They are a lecturer in foreign languages, Spanish and Portuguese at the University of Pennsylvania. So thank you and welcome. Finally, we also have here today Eduardo Viana da Silva, who received his PhD in Luso-Brazilian literature with an emphasis in applied linguistics from University of California, Santa Barbara. He is an associate teaching professor and the coordinator for the Portuguese program at the University of Washington in Seattle. So thank you all for being here. And we're going to start by allowing you to add anything that I forgot to say about yourselves, but also answer the first question, which is, why is it important to you that language be inclusive?
I guess I'll go first since I was introduced first. So, and thank you everyone for being here. I'm very happy to have this conversation here with all of you. Thank you so much for attending this event. And the only thing I would add about my presentation, it's also about my mother, Annalise. It's one of the things that I always talk about when I introduce myself, that I'm the daughter of Annalise Reis. And it's very important for me, this connection, because the very reason I am here in academia today, learning more and more, it's because my mother was a great inspiration. She didn't have the privilege, the access that I had related to education. So now my presence here, everywhere I go, I try to bring my mom and her presence with me as well to honor all the work that she did raising me. And I think this would also lead to my answer to the question that why is it important? It is important because we are diverse, we are complex, we are multiple people. And language is part of our identity. It's how we construct our identities. It's how we transform our identities through language, in language. So it's very important that the language that we use reflects what we see in society. So we are diverse, we are multiple, and we use language in many different ways. And for example, the example that I mentioned about my mother, because she didn't have access to formal education, the way she uses language is going to be different than a person with higher education. And also you have the generational difference. You have so many different ways that we can relate to language. And I think it's very important for us as language instructors, they would have this representation in our language practices, in the way that we teach language, that we make this available for our students as well. And my mom, she always participated in my classes. So even before the pandemic, before this whole Zoom thing, we always had, like, my mom from Brazil, from Feira de Santana, interacting with my students here at the University of Pittsburgh through Skype, so they could talk to her, they could see the different ways that we can use the Portuguese language. So I will start with that, like connecting the two questions, the opportunity to say a little bit more about me, and also to think about the importance of being inclusive in language, because I think many times when you use inclusive language, we connect first with the idea of gender, having like neutral ways to refer to people, but being inclusive goes beyond that as well. It is a big part of that, the use of bem-vindes, elos, eles. It's absolutely important because we see this diversity in the word, but it's just, I would like to open now this discussion to think about the inclusion in many different aspects as well, not just the gender aspect of it.
I could add to that just by saying that a couple of years ago, I started working on a textbook for Portuguese. And that's when I was more intentional on how to use inclusive language. Before that, I think my experience in the United States has also shaped the way that I talk to people, and in Portuguese as well. Living in Seattle, that's a very progressive city, and I feel that people are much more connected, perhaps than other parts, other cities, even around the state of Washington. That has contributed as well. And the thing with the textbook was that I noticed that the textbooks that I used before, the dialogues were created by people who were professors at universities in the United States, and the language was pretty much a standard version of Portuguese, the ones that you watch on TV Globo, Jornal das 8. And I thought that with some exceptions, Clica Brasil being one of them, that it would portray different ways of talking, different ways of being. It was more of a monolithical representation of language. And so that's one part of it. The other part is because I grew up gay. I grew up in Brazil with lots of bullying around me, and having to deal with language from that perspective as well, and that has had an effect on who I am today, and the way that I look at language and how I reclaim words that were used before in bullying, and now I am using them in a different way, and I think that has also had an effect on how I perceive language as well. But the intentionality of it, it's a learning curve to me. Like, I started really thinking about it more in depth in the last 3 years, I would say. So, and I'm still learning a lot. So I expect to learn a lot from this presentation, from this talk as well.
Well, I think that in a case of inclusivity, and I always connect it to realness. The fact that I can pull it off when I prepare a class, and then I present a class and I deliver the class, and the way that students react to it in terms of social perception, as to Eduardo was saying, in terms of words that were used in the past as derogatory terms, but it's words that actually are essences. Like, for instance, the word like faggot, for instance, all those words for the students are always perceived as essences. Outside the classroom, it's usually where the bad things happen, and the chauvinistic, xenophobic, and the unfair social perceptions start. So I think that in a classroom, the students and myself, we do not have to change anything. We do not have to declare any kind of sexuality or gender, and no one is expected to say right away what their favorite pronouns are. It's just, it's life, and we can always change the pronouns because sexuality is fluid, and it's not the same. It's not always the same sexuality throughout our lives. So it's fine, and no one has a big deal around it. It's real, and the students know that. I know that. They know exactly which words they can use, and it's fine. But it creates a real classroom, and not so much something based on fake materials or experiences that are not real, or words that are unfair. Again, so yeah, that's my take on inclusivity in the classroom.
I think I would like to add, supposing that this is my turn now, I think it is. Luana first said that language is identity. Of course it is, but it is also power. It is probably the most expressive way to index power, even if you don't have it that much, or even when you don't have that much power, you can convey that idea through language. So if language is power, and we are part of a group of people that think that power should be shared, then why not be inclusive through language? Now, that said, I don't think, and this is from a essentially linguistic perspective, and it's a very personal view of mine, I don't think it works as well in Portuguese as it does in English. I think in Portuguese, there's a bit of a challenge to be inclusive morphologically. So if on the one hand, there have been practices such as saying at the beginning of talks, bom dia, alunas e alunos, or even using the E as a neutral gender, as Mark very well did at the beginning. So he said bem-vindes. I myself had never heard this at the beginning of a panel like this here in Brazil. So normally what people will do is saying both the feminine gender mark and then the masculine. And that works pretty well. But for example, using the plural eles or elas for they doesn't quite work very well. So the only reason I'm mentioning this is because from the perspective of language itself, I'm very interested in how this is going to turn out as we continue to do it like this in terms of linguistic practices. Another aspect that I think is very interesting to me as a sociolinguist, especially a sociolinguist that is interested in how we work with the meaning of what we say and what people say. For me, it's very interesting to keep trying to broaden the view that people have of what linguistic variation is. Because, you know, as academic people, there's a lot of things that we just like presuppose, and we don't even need to talk about them. But when we go in the real world, so, and I'm not saying that the academic world is not real, but it is sort of a parallel reality. It seems like the real world is a little tougher. The very idea of linguistic variation is a little odd to people, because people seem to have this very invariable idea of what language is and how people should sound, and why would I talk this or another way, and why people from different regions talk differently. And when Carlos used the word, I can't remember exactly, I think essential, I think is what he said. They said, I'm sorry, I think your pronoun is they. People in the world have very essential ways of thinking about language. If you're a man, you should talk like this. If you're a woman, you should talk like that. If you're from Rio, you shouldn't say this way. And sometimes I think that as sociolinguists, we don't always do the best work we could in terms of making sociolinguistics and all this conversation more available to people. I don't think people have that much access as we would like to these ideas. So this is what I would like to add to this introductory presentation of what we're doing here today.
Yes, thank you. I would like to pick up on that. And then also what Luana and Carlos and Eduardo said, especially when Luana said that we focus more on the pronouns, or in the case of Portuguese, we're not talking about pronouns, we're talking about everything, because we know that Portuguese is a very gender-based language, and also the default is masculine, right? As Ronald just pointed out. But I would like to ask about materials, because Eduardo was saying, oh, we noticed that materials don't bring that the readings and the things that we are bringing to our classrooms, they are not addressing those issues, so we are. And I would like to ask you to share a little bit how you adjust or create or develop your materials in order to address that in a natural and real world way, as Carlos said, because we are not, again, trying to tell our students that they must tell us who they are right away, but to create an environment and a safe classroom so they feel comfortable if they choose to do so.
So right before COVID, Carlos Pio and I traveled to Brazil in the summer, and we recorded people, and we would ask them, just give a prompt and ask them to talk about, let's say, their hairstyle or the clothes that they were wearing, or what they do on the weekends, what they, you know, the typical topics that you have in a first year textbook. And from those spontaneous dialogues without a transcript, without a script, would then select some of them that would work for the textbook, right? A lot of them we couldn't use because they were either way too fast, or they just had too much, you know, language structure right for the first year that was really difficult to to digest. But from the ones we selected, we came up with a lot of, and I can type up examples, a lot of very natural language, spoken language, more colloquial, so lots of contractions like pra, which is para a, pro, lots of ta instead of está, num instead of em right? And so lots of contractions, lots of shortened versions of words, and vocabulary that you don't necessarily see on textbooks, like instead of saying where is it, something like cadê, right? That we use all the time. If you're Brazilian, cadê o livro? Cadê isso? Cadê aquilo? And personally, I thought that's great because that's the way students want to speak. They don't want to speak like a dictionary. They want to talk like people talk out there, right? But I do know that there are colleagues that would criticize that and say, well, you know, you should be teaching the proper grammar or the proper way of saying things. And my take is that I'm not saying we're not going to do that. It's just that there is a time and place, and you know, in a very first year language class, you want students just to learn to communicate the basics in the language. And most of the recordings came from university students, you know, so there is not a lot of variation in terms of social status. We did some recordings of like a waiter in a restaurant, you know, that was not a university student, and I wanted to do others, but you know, COVID kind of interrupted the flow of the project. But my idea was to do short recordings, like in a hair salon, in a grocery store, in a bakery, padaria, right? Because they all have different registers and different ways of communicating. And as Luana was pointing out about her mom, right, Luana, that there is a different way of speaking. Her register might not be the same as of an university student, right? And I think it's important to present that to students because they were going to go to Brazil and interact with a variety of people, not just university professors, right? And even among university professors, you have a range of ways of communicating as well, depending on the region. I can go on and on about this, but I will stop for now and I'll let somebody else continue.
Well, if I may follow up to Eduardo's comment, I just wanted to give two examples, which are some of the things that I always do in class in the first year, in the first semester classes. It's to talk about routine, daily activities, and sometimes the activities are extremely broad and very neutral, like, you know, to wake up or to go out and dance, to go out with my friends, etc. So one of the things that I've changed just to make a connection, but it doesn't mean, again, that everyone has to partake in these activities. But one of the activities is actually connected to something that Luana talked about in another talk she gave last week, which is quilombar, for example. And this is especially important for the Philadelphia crowd because it's, you know, Philadelphia is the city in the United States with the majority is African-American. So a lot of this, my African-American students react to that. Of course, and again, sometimes they say it, other times they do not say it. But it's fine, it's there. So they know that there's a connection. The other thing, so the quilombar in terms of ethnicity, and the other example for LGTB people is the dançar, vogue, e, por exemplo, e arrasar. And it's something that really works really well because more and more, I mean, the Vogue, I mean, eventually left Atlanta, Philadelphia, and New York, and went to São Paulo, o Rio, e para Lisboa. So it created today these new pores of trans people and LGBT people that come together just to dance folk and just to get together and talk about their own stuff. So yeah, those are two examples.
I guess it's my turn now. So I would like to pick up on something that Ronald was saying at the beginning about the use of bem-vindes and the use of gender neutral language in Portuguese, I would say that it does work, and it does work really well. And it just needs people to be open and willing to do it, because sometimes it's something that we're not familiar with. It's not a sound that we usually use in our daily conversation, but they do exist. There are possibilities of use. For example, it also depends on what kind of events, or even academic events, we are going to a gathering. For example, if we go to events with Black feminist women in Brazil, Black trans women in Brazil, you'd see they use a lot of bem-vindes, or todas, todes, e todos, and even putting todos at the end and not starting with todos, todas, e todes, but say todas, todes, and todos, and also inverting the order to think always that we need to greet the masculine first. So this is very present in Brazilian Portuguese as well. In events that you attend, you're going to see the use of these expressions very frequently. But then also, if you go to different kinds of events, you're also going to see that some people are not as open to acknowledge the possibilities and even trying and learning, being open to learn. And I think this is one of the things about the way we think about academia as well, and the separation with what is considered real world. Academia is very real and can be very real as well. And then the discrimination, the racism, sexist practice that you see outside of academia, they're also present in academia. So it's also a way for us to rethink what do we understand by academia, and if we are supporting this kind of separation with the real world, or if you are actually welcoming the possibilities of use of the language. And one of those things, for example, I like to give examples. One opportunity, I was in Brazil, and I was in a taxi, and I was talking to the taxi driver. We are having like a very nice conversation. We are talking a lot. And then the moment that he asked, like, oh, what do you do? I say, oh, I'm a Portuguese teacher. I teach Portuguese. He was quiet for the rest of the trip. Absolutely quiet. So you see that we are doing a very bad work of creating this huge gap. The moment that he heard that I was a Portuguese teacher, this guy was silent. He was afraid of talking to me because he thought that I was going to correct what he was saying, that I would be judging the way he speaks, that I would be like giving him like a bad grade because of the way he was talking to me. So it just shows that we're doing very badly if this is how people feel when they talk to us the moment that we express what do we do for a life that we teach Portuguese. And also this process of silencing, I'm giving this example related to the Portuguese language. We're both speaking Portuguese. We were both from Bahia. I was having this nice conversation, but this can also go if you think about gender, that you think that people are not going to feel comfortable of being who they are because of the way that we're going to react. So if we think it is too difficult to say bem-vindes, we are saying that it is too difficult to accept your existence in my environment. It is too difficult for me to deal with who you are. It is too difficult to me to accept and being open and learn from you. So I think the moment that we start not saying that it is too difficult to say bem-vindes, it is not too difficult to say ilo, elo, or whatever people come up with, they say, this is who I am. Just be open to that and learn and just teach me. And this will go the same if you think about the Portuguese. if you go through the vocabulary that it's so frequent in Portuguese that people use, that they don't think it's racist, because, oh, that's how I've been talking my whole life. These are the way things go. No, the moment a person points out to you, it's like, I don't feel comfortable when you use this expression. Please don't call me like this. Please don't say this. Just listen and learn. For example, in my class, one student of mine, he taught me about the existence of Pajubá in Brazil that I never heard of. I didn't know anything about it, but he was the one teaching me about Pajubá. He taught me vocabulary. He shared with me videos with Pajubá dictionary that's available on YouTube. So the moment you open for that, then the students feel they can be whoever they want to be, and then you're not going to be judging them. We're both going to learn together. So it's just a matter, and you don't have to know everything, because I do not know. I just learned about Pajubá. I just learned about gender neutral clothes too, because if you think about our book, the Ponto de Encontro, that's the one that most of the universities here use, they have a lesson about clothing. And then you have women's clothes and men's clothes. The vocabulary is separated like this. And then you have the pictures and the images for the men's clothes, and the images and the description of a women's clothes. And then we had this very fruitful discussion in my class about gender neutral clothing, that they have stores, they have designers, and they even found like websites in Brazil that they have stores with the gender neutral clothing. And I was like, this is absolutely great. I didn't know that they had stores for gender neutral clothes in Brazil. So I think, and I'll close with that, it's just a matter of being like an attentive listener, to be open to learn, and just letting people know that their lives, their identities matter, because this has a serious effect on people's lives. So if you think about Brazil, for example, is the country that kills the most of the LGBTQI plus community. So we cannot say that it is too difficult to use inclusive language, because the lives of people are in danger because of the way we react to their existence and the way they express themselves. If you think about trans women lives in Brazil, the life expectancy of 35 years old, this is unacceptable. So we need to be much more open to that and see it's not difficult. So just teach me, let me learn from you. Am I doing this right? If you make mistakes, because we are going to make mistakes as well, because we are all learning to, it's just take some time and you get used to this. The pronouns, even the they, them in English, it's not as easy as people think about. Oh, in English is very easy. In Portuguese, it's not. You hear a lot of resistance from people using the English language. Say, oh, they, but it's not one person. Why am I saying they? So you're going to see that resistance even in a language that is gender neutral like English. So that resistance, not just because of the language in itself, because language is not just, oh, this package, this can that's ready here. It shows how people perceive the existence of people as well. So I'll just add that. Thank you.
I think you're muted, Ronald, if you're talking right now.
Thank you. I just feel like I should make myself a little clearer. First of all, I absolutely agree with everything Luana just said. When I was talking about Portuguese in reference to English, I was merely mentioning linguistic limitation in terms of morphology. Just want to make sure that I didn't intend to say that it was too difficult for us to do that. People in general, I don't think it is, and I think it's absolutely necessary. So I totally agree with Luana. But to come back
to what I think was Michelle's question about materials that we use. Am I correct, Michelle?
That's sure.
I have to say that when I mentioned the differences between what I called the real world and the academic world, and I do agree with Luana when she says that academia is very real as well, because the problems that we see in society, we also see in academia. But I was also talking about, in a very pinpointed way, what we teach as sociolinguists. So I was referring specifically to sociolinguists in general. I think Scott and Mark, perhaps Kendra, I think I'm recognizing her picture. I can't see her video, but I think Kendra is the Kendra that I'm thinking about. Hello. I'm referring to sociolinguists as like a technical area of linguistics. And when I said that not always do we do the best job, is in terms of exactly showing people that perhaps we have expectations about what people should sound like, or things that they should say, but our expectations not necessarily are the only ones. So we can hear unexpected language forms or uses in general from anybody, and that shouldn't be a problem. And when I mentioned that sometimes we as sociolinguists don't do the best work, what I mean is we don't make that as that sort of idea as popular as it could be by now. And to answer Michelle's question more directly, this is something that we've been trying to work on at the university in terms of making the sort of thought that we produce and discuss more available to people outside of academia. So.
Yes, I think that was exactly what I was trying to get to, which is how are we making ourselves accessible, and how are we reaching out of this very real world of academia, but we know that people do not have as much access as they should. And it's not, let's just say it, a diverse environment. It is an environment where decisions are made, and most of those decisions, for example, if we get the context of Brazil, we know that language and education policies and language policies, they come from academia as a way of, oh, we are going to consult with scholars, and then we're going to come up with policy to go to education, and then the teachers are going to implement. So those teachers who actually teach children, they are not part of the conversation. And if they are, it's very superficially. Usually they are participants or they are polled by academia. And then those in academia who are participating in those processes are also very much aligned, let's say, with what those policies wanted to be. So it's not an open agenda. It's a very closed agenda with very focused things to be achieved. So as Luana was saying, everything happens for a reason. It's supposed to be difficult, and people have to believe that it is difficult and or wrong and incorrect, right? So this prescriptivism of our own language persists. And then it is, as again, Luana pointed out, a way for people feel uncomfortable around language teachers, language educators, because traditionally, that's how people visioned us and how they perceived us, because that's how, let's be honest, our Portuguese teachers in school might have been. I know my experience was like that. I hope yours were not, but it was always being corrected by my first language teacher and always being corrected by second language teachers. And the correction was about the proper way to say things. And if we perpetuate that as scholars, what is our contribution? So my next question would be that, what is our contribution? How are we connecting the dots, or how are we filling up the gap between what we do in academia with our inclusive language agenda and how this gets out?
Well, I have an example, which is, I think that, I mean, the majority of my colleagues and the people that teach at universities all over the world are usually do not follow what actually happens in the real life, because it's knowledge that has to adapt to real life and not the other way. So luckily we have people like Luana that are in a program in which they can teach us, like, for instance, in terms, again, of ethnicity, how not to use words as denegrir or mancha negra, and that sometimes the dictionaries have to keep up with what's going on, and not that the academia or the professors are the holders of knowledge. And the other thing is, like, for instance, to follow up on Luana, on Michele's and Luana's comment, which is from the Ponto de Encontro, as any other book, of course, when we talk about the family section, that is a very traditional family, very problematic in its standing. And also, for instance, the never addressing words like, for instance, sometimes my friends are like, how do I say, how do I use the word bicha or sapatão in Portuguese? Because that's the way that I want to refer to myself. So I have to give them the material. And of course, what they do with the words, it's up to them. So I think that's a really good way to, for us to keep up what's going on. And again, with what Luana said, we have to learn, hear what different people have to say about stuff, but especially the people who actually live it.
And I would say, around this topic, that students are ahead of the game for the most part. So, the example that you gave about Pajubá was a good one, right? And also listening to them, because at least, well, in Seattle, that's my experience, right? Students don't really care for the gender expression of a person. Like, you can be whoever you are, and doesn't matter, they will be your friend, right? That's for, like, most of the students in the classroom. I understand that doesn't apply for the whole United States, but that's my experience here. So if I listen to them and apply that to the classroom, I think we are winning, right? There are a few materials that are open educational resources. It's all in Portuguese, but I'm sharing two of them here. One is Plural, that's a textbook that is focused on diversity. So, that's the whole premise of this textbook. And it's really well done. It's the second link. The first one is Tirando de Letra, that's from Unesp. It doesn't focus on diversity, but it's a book that was produced with the help of lots of students at Unesp Araraquara. And I think it does represent language that's very real in a lot of ways. And let me put also the one that I am always working on it, that's Bate-Papo. I think I'll never finish working on this textbook. But, this one, that is the one I'm working on, has also the preoccupation of representing language in a natural way. And, if we diverse a little bit from the conversation around gender and just talk about the regions of the countries, or not just Brazil, but, the Portuguese-speaking world. One thing that I noticed on the textbook that I'm working on is that even when I asked Brazilians to record the way they speak, and if they are from Nordeste, from the northeast of Brazil, they would give me a second look and like, are you sure you want this? I'm like, yeah, I want you to talk like you talk. And they're like, but I don't conjugate the tu. I say tu faz, right? I'm like, yeah, say tu faz. Like, we had to have a conversation before saying it's okay. It's like, but that's a textbook. I'm like, I know, but that's how millions of people in your region speak. And I want my students to hear that, because that's how Portuguese is spoken in that part of the country, right? But I found interesting that I was trying to justify that it's okay. They know it's okay, but they didn't think it was okay for a textbook. So, that gap between, material that's printed and, has an ISBN, whatever, or the way we speak, we use language, it's not, doesn't always match, right? So I found that interesting that I had that conversation with them. And just today I was teaching that lesson in class and was explaining to students that, that's how people talk. And I was saying that's how my sister talks. She's from the South, but she'd say como tu tá instead of como tu estás, right? Como tu tá. And I told them that I changed because I worked in a travel agency and I wanted to be a little bit snobbish. And that was the way that, I thought I'm going to get a job if I speak more with você than using tu, right? So talking about privilege and what that means in the language and local expressions from different regions, I think it's really important, even though I don't expect the students to be, completely fluent in different ways of speaking on year one. I do expect them to understand that there is a huge variation in the language, different registers, and if they get to be a superior level in the language, they would be able then to adjust their register accordingly, right? They won't always sound the same. That's not what you expect from a superior level speaker of a language. So, okay, I'll stop here.
So in my case here, I have to use ponto de encontro in my classes. I'm a TA, so I cannot just pick the book, the materials that we're going to use. So I try to adapt what I have in my hands and try to create possibilities even within this book. For example, another example from ponto de encontro is the one that they talk about describing people, and then you have a person who is described as negro, cabelo crespo, and then under you have it's moreno, and then the students, you look like the color is pretty much the same of the two of them. So why this one is negro, why this one is moreno? So what's going on here? And then they'll ask, and especially here in the US with the history of the N-word and all that, they're always very careful with the way they're going to address Black people in Brazil. So they always ask what would be like appropriate ways of doing it. And then it is interesting that sometimes even some colleagues of mine, they would text me, so Luana, how would be an appropriate way to refer to Black people in Brazil? And then I was like, there are so many Black people in Brazil. We are complex. The way that I identify myself, it might not be the way that a person with the same complexity, with the same hair kind are going to identify themselves. So we do not have this magic word that's going to work for everyone. It's like, okay, you can call everyone negro. This is the word that we're going to use. So every person you meet in Brazil, you're going to call them negro. And then some people might be very offended if you call them negro. Or if you call them preto, some people identify themselves as moreno. So we are a complex group. So many people would say, oh, but I have a Black friend in Brazil that say that this is the word. They say, oh, you have one Black friend? Let me tell you that 54% of the population is Black, and an experience of a Black person living in Santa Catarina is going to be completely different than a person living in Bahia, where 80% of the population is Black. The way you use neguinho, neguinha, meu nego, minha nega in Bahia, it's not going to work the same way if you go to the south of Brazil. So you need to be first aware that we are complex. So put this out there. So we're not going to find just one word that is going to work for everyone. And then this lesson, it's like a very nice opportunity to open to this conversation. And what I do, I usually show many different cultural productions. They would show, for example, how people are so proud of being Black, use the word negro, negra. For example, the song by Dona Ivone Lara, and it says, sorriso negro, abraço negro, traz felicidade, to show the positive ways that you can use the word negro, negra. That does not have to be a bad connotation. It doesn't have to mean something that is very negative, that it's bad. But it also show, there is a video of an African person living in Brazil that he made this video that it was circulating a lot. They'll be like, I don't want to be called negro. It's bad because everything that is bad here, use the word negro, é a peste negra, é a lista negra, é o mercado negro. But preto, I like it. Preto is really good because say café preto, a grana preta. So it sounds like more positive. So you just show the way he relate to that word. So then if I tell my students, oh, it's okay to just call everyone negro, negra in Brazil. And they get there, they meet this guy and they call him, and then another thing is we have names. We all have names as well. I'm Luana, and you have Eduardo here, you have Mark. We all have names. Then why do you need to talk about my ethnicity or my race every time you meet, oh, that Black woman over there? Do you say that white man over there? Do you use the word white? Or, oh, the white man is waiting for me here. Oh, look, there's a white man waiting for you at the reception. You don't say that. You don't use this. So why do you have to say this when it's a Black person? Why do you can erase the whole identities that this person has, and you have to reduce them to a color. So it's even the book that it's like this, we have all this rich material now with internet, these are all available out there. So you can see how different people would say about their own personality, about their identity. And poetry is the one that I use the most. I love poetry. I think poetry is a great way to explore the multiple meanings of things, to open our minds to different possibilities, because one word, like if you say the word road, so road can mean so many different things if you put it in a poem. Like it's just the poetry, I think it opens already your mind to this multiple possibilities of meaning. So I really like to use poetry a lot in my class. In the poetry group that I studied here, Adverse is one of the resources that I use a lot with my students, so we can see the poems, like how many different people would express about their identities. For example, we just translated recently a poem about a Black trans woman from Brazil, and the title of the book is Bicha Travesti de Cor. And then she's like, Bicha Travesti, is that okay? He said, like, read the book, listen to them, see how they identify themselves, and not just this one. Don't stop with this one. You read this one, Black trans women, there are more, read more. Because it's just to, I think that for me, the secret is just that, to just show that there's no script of, oh, this is right, this is wrong. Just go away with the script, because it's not going to work in conversation. And one example that is very funny, and even when sometimes I show my students so many possibilities, there are possibilities that I didn't even think about that could happen in conversation. Like one of my students were in the airport in Brazil. So it's a very formal space. So he needed like a vaccination card for yellow fever because he was going to Colombia. So he needed this international vaccination card proving that he got the vaccine. And then he gets to the airport, like a very formal like space, and then the person comes with something like that. Bom dia, meu patrão, o que é que você manda? He was not ready for that. And even I was not ready for that, because I would never think, wow, this is what the person told you at the airport. So we're always going to experience this, like things that we never thought that would be a possibility of a conversation. It is right there. So just be like, just explore all these possibilities. And even if you have a very limited material like I do, with ponto de encontro. There's always something out there that we can use.
Just taking a hook on your conversation, Luana, I agree with you. Like when students ask, negro or preto, I always ask, well, depends of your friends in Brazil, the community you're part of, et cetera, how they identify themselves. And in this conversation of, I don't identify people by their race, I don't go around talking about people's hair and skin color, right? That's not what we do normally, right? But that said, when you are creating a textbook, you're trying to make sense of the world, right? And especially in a textbook that's a lower language level. So those discussions we can have in English, and sometimes I think it's appropriate to have them in English so students can understand the cultural aspects of it. But particularly the word negro, students have a problem with it because it associates with Negro, right? So they think, well, this is so 60s, 50s, right? This is so over. And then at the same time, I had a conversation just about maybe 6 months ago with Juliana Vicente, that's the film director, and she's with Preta Porte, and I can write her name here. And I was really asking her, because I really don't know. I was saying, I haven't lived in Brazil for so long. I'm from the South, that's mostly white, and I'm considered a white person in Brazil. And I was asking her, like, vidas pretas importam, por exemplo, né? I can see that there is a transition between negro y preto, right? Because when I lived in Brazil like 10, 15 years ago, it was all about orgulho negro, right? Like the black pride. And I see more and more people saying preto. And she was like, yes, but not for you yet, because you are white. That was her response. And I thought, okay, I get it, right? I respect it and accept it. But it was interesting to hear that from a film director that produced, a black woman in Brazil that produced films, some of them around race as well. I wanted to share one link from Seja Antirracista, because I think it does start, it's all in Portuguese, and it's not in English, but it does touch some of these topics that we are talking about, about commenting on people's appearances, what's okay, what is not okay. And that was a manifesto that came out last year. It has a nice introduction on that. And I think for us who are Portuguese instructors, we have to educate ourselves. So reading this has helped me on this front. So.
Yeah, if I may, just a little comment. Like one thing that helps is also to reconceptualize white, because the white that you are in Brazil is not the white that you are in the US. And often you have translations, even race books talking about race relations in the US, translating white as branco. But we are talking about different realities. Yeah, yes, there are commonalities, and the contrastive aspect helps, but starting by deconstructing white, as Luana was mentioning, you're not going to say, oh, the white guy over there at the cashier, but you could say the branquelo, no? Então, like to rethink about our own position, especially when we are abroad, no?
I agree. And Nilma is not here, but I followed one of her suggestions from the event on Portuguese that was to use literature that's written by Black writers in Brazil. And that has helped to create a more inclusive conversation in the classroom as well. Cidinha da Silva being one of them. I use Melô da Contradição. I can write here if someone who teaches Portuguese might be interested. Cidinha da Silva, the Crônica, Melô da Contradição. And and I thought that was very, very good. And Conceição Evaristo I had used before as well. And I'm talking about like second year language classes, right? So it is doable. Like you can still do that in a second year language class. Poetry from Conceição Evaristo. And Carlos Pio, I don't want to put you on the spot, but since you are, maybe you want to comment about your experience in Guinea, right? When you are asking about racism there. Would you like to?
About ethnicity.
Ethnicity, okay.
Isis was saying, I think Isis was saying was so important because it's the whiteness, I mean, ethnicity is always compromised also by citizen status all around the world. What is, for instance, how do we, for instance, in a class, in one of the classes that I teach, which is Portuguese for the Professions, one of the things that we do is how to fill out information, to apply for a visa, to apply for the international vaccine travelers document, and etc. And usually students all over the world think that the words are exactly the same, like white or black, or for instance, the opposition of black is like, for instance, in Portugal, gypsy, Roma people. If an African person is only black in Portugal, can he be something else, like pardo, etc. So, depends, I mean, we are a result of different sociological forces like gender, citizen status, ethnicity, of course, religion and culture. And so it's really interesting how to see how the different forms around the world, like Brazil, Mozambique, Portugal, or the United States, how do we fill out that kind of information? How do we are perceived socially? How do we declare ourselves? The other thing that I wanted to say is, to what Eduardo was saying, yes. So when I was presenting the project that Eduardo and I have in Guinea-Bissau, this was a regular university class. And one of the things that I said when I was talking about openness and inclusivity was what is inclusivity and which level are we talking about? What were the categories? And one of the things I was saying, so people that from the same sex that get married or partake in relationships, be it romantic or not, or for instance, in terms of ethnicity, and they were like, but ethnicity, how? And I was saying, well, for instance, being black, for instance, or for instance, a Roma people, commonly known as a gypsy. And they were like, because in Guinea, 99.7% of the population is black, they were like, but why do you talk, I mean, the inclusivity is actually for the white, because the majority of the world is black for them. So it's really funny how things turn around constantly, and they just depend on the place where we are. And that's really, really interesting. And another reaction that I got was, why do you have to talk about people that transition in terms of biological sex? And I said, trans people, and said, no, travesti. Like, okay. And the other thing was, why do you have to talk about people from the same sex? And I was like, well, because they still face a lot of stuff, a lot of challenges, a lot of obstacles. And they said, well, but you know, everyone is religion, and the Allah or God do not accept those people. So why do you have to talk about that? I was like, oh my God, what do I say? So it's really funny. I mean, how in every culture, everything is so different. And so what Luana said, and of course, what Eduardo said, is so complex and organic. And sometimes we don't have the answers for everything, but it's really interesting. I wanted just to show you something that really important in terms of what I thought, which is when someone usually asks me, and just to follow up to Michele's question, when someone, for instance, when we organize workshops or we go to workshops, and how do we convey and follow through those messages, and when we come back to our departments, what do we bring back? And sometimes, or a lot frequently, people say to me, well, if you're talking about gender, you, for instance, on a first semester Portuguese language class. And then like, if you're talking about gender, you have to talk about Silvia Federici and Butler. And I was like, why? because you have to give them the foundation for that. I always say, I don't have to give the foundation for anything because we've always been here. And I don't need academic references to justify my existence for whatever. What Butler and Marcia and Federici are talking about is social perceptions, which is totally, I mean, it's another chapter of the talk. But when we have to talk about the fact that we exist, if you want to use these pronouns, you can use them. If you don't want to use them, like Eduardo said, it's fine. You just have to see people. This usually brings a reaction, which is, well, I'm a cis person, so does it mean that I have to use inclusive pronouns? Of course not. If you identify with that, it's fine. I mean, just remember that all of these different people, we've always been here in the social spectrum. Now, you have to see them, that's all. So it's not that we exist now because of the pronouns, it's always been there. The thing that I wanted to show you is what I give to the students. This is the last thing in terms of materials is guides. And it's 3 guides that came out recently in Brazil and in Portugal in 2021, which are 3 guides that are really useful for my Portuguese for the Profession classes. And usually students are like, so do I have to use these guides? Well, you just have to know that if someone wants to use these pronouns, you have to be able to acknowledge the pronouns and use them. But remember that you don't have to memorize the guides because no one memorizes the guides. It's just for you to get some familiarity. And the guides are these. This is just in terms of, this is a small activity, but I'll talk about this later. But the guides are these, wait a second, please. The guides are these, for instance. This is one of the last Manual Prático de Linguagem Inclusiva that was produced between Portugal and Brazil, but it was mainly directed to Brazil and now it was just released in Portugal. Inclusão de pessoas transgêneras e não binárias no local de trabalho brasileiro. Uma rápida reflexão, 12 técnicas básicas e outras estratégias semânticas. All of these are really short. They're usually 10 to 12 pages, so it's really good to sum up of the basics. The second one is the Guia Prático para Português Inclusivo, which was organized by the Queer EST, que é o grupo queer do Instituto Superior Técnico de Lisboa. And the last one is, again, 12 pages, I guess. And the last one is this one, which is by the Regi ex Aequo, Guia sobre Saúde e Leis Trans em Portugal, Recursos e Procedimentos. This is particularly important when we are talking about medical Portuguese. How to talk to people, some physical conditions, etc., etc., etc. The other thing that I wanted to say is in terms of gender, but also in terms of citizen status, is the Vamos Juntos, or Vamos Juntas, which came out, I guess, in 2020, and with the COVID pandemic, coordinated by Leandro Rodrigues Alves Diniz, by the UFMG, and by the Ana Cecília C.C. Bison, which is a really, really good book in terms of inclusion, of linguistic inclusion for immigrants that come to Brazil. Curso Português como Língua de Acolhimento, and it has all the explanations in English, Spanish, Swahili, what else? Oh my God, I can't remember. Well, I can't remember right now, but so this is a really good book for immigrants that arrive to Portugal or Angola or Brazil. So that's my intervention.
Perhaps what you want to do, Carlos, is to type up some of these titles and authors in the chat so people.
Yes, I was just talking. Yes, I'll do it. Yes.
Maybe that would be helpful. There is also the Manifesto Ile from Saxbox. That was another one that I think it's a great source. Manifesto Ile Dile, also from Saxbox. That will then explain how to deal with inclusive language. And some of the things I don't find in academia necessarily because it's not written about or it's not there yet, but I do find information on TV shows. And one of them that I think it's a smart one, it's like a Tempero Drag from Dona Rita. I just think she's great. And she does teach, you know, it's a very sophisticated way of thinking, and I can give you here her. It's a YouTube video about neutral language. It's on 142 seconds. That's what I was watching before. But what she has to say about inclusivity that I thought was important is that the intention of being inclusive, right? Include everybody, represent all kinds of peoples, right? In your language, not to offend people. That was another thing, and not to use language that's violent, even without having the intention to, right? Because this, and I think Luana touched on that, right? The idea that, oh, I didn't know, it's an excuse that it's not really sticking anymore. Like, you have to learn, right? So there are lots of things I don't know, and I just acknowledge my ignorance, and I try to learn from people and see how I position myself in the world, right? She gave an example of cantar de galo e galinha, right? Of how that is very gender specific, right? When galinha means a woman, it means a slut, right? And what a problematic word to start with, right? Because a man is not necessarily a slut, but a girl is, right? So, and cantar de galo as being the rooster, right? That gives the orders in the house and things like that. Another example she gave was a verdade transvestida de mentira, when she was saying that, you know, being drag is not a lie, it's who you are at that moment, right? It's your truth. So to use the word trans to say that you are a lie, it's a form of violence too. And the list goes on and on with examples. Carlos gave one with mancha negra, denegrir, right? That I think it's very important as well. Judiar is another one that carries a lot of negative connotations too.
Yeah, I can also add to the list some of the words and expressions that are very common in Portuguese. They're very ableist, right? So we say things like in a negative way, talking about people's disabilities. Mm-hmm. And how, and getting there, I would like you to talk a little bit about those two groups that are resisting. So the resistance towards inclusive language and the resistance of actually promoting it and making it happen. So we understand that there are different types of resistance and they have different rationales and perspectives. But I would like you to talk a little bit about what kind of resistances you have encountered. Are they more institutionalized, or they are more in a sense that people are just racist or ignorant, or they are sexist, but also it's just ignorance and lack of commitment to becoming a better person, or you actually see barriers trying to stop the work that you are trying to do? Active barriers.
Ronald, I think you're muted.
Yes, thank you. At the University of São Paulo, just before COVID started here last year, we were doing extension programs. I'm not sure this is a term that is used in English. So we were receiving both teachers from high school and elementary school at the university to talk to them about first variation, then variation in terms of class, of region, of gender. And in that experience, I probably should mention that I wouldn't talk about it in terms of barriers, but it's just amazing to realize. And as many times as I've been to the United States, sometimes in very long periods of times, for me here, it's been sort of impressive, sometimes incredible, how much people don't know that, you know, there is this thing that we call variation and that they can use it to their benefit. So I wouldn't call that a barrier, but it's some sort of a challenge, I would say, because it seems very basic. But on the other hand, I wouldn't say that I have encountered institutional difficulties. There seems to be a lot of, at least, perhaps I'm lucky, but at least the University of São Paulo, there's pretty much like a lot of movement towards inclusivity. Is that the word? Sometimes my derivation sort of flicks, but yeah. And in terms, I think what we miss is what we were talking about before, which is materials. But in terms of predisposition, I think it's been pretty good, at least where I am. I would like to hear other experiences that people have had.
I think the world is so divided that, you know, resistance comes from that divide in politics, and the US and Brazil, it's in a similar situation. So it's when you see the rise of, and Luana touched on that, of the number of trans women that are being assassinated in Brazil and the number of hate crimes. So, you know, a lot of the times they happen in inland, like in the interior. And a lot of times they're not reported as well. So I think, as you know, if you're talking about inclusivity in the world, I think you're living a time that it is almost like a backlash of, you know, people are fighting to be seen and some want to eliminate some of us. So unfortunately, in academia, I have freedom of expression and of production at my institution. I'm very lucky. And I think from the students' part, I don't get a lot of resistance at all, quite the opposite in Seattle. But again, it's a very particular situation. I think from colleagues, I might, you know, sometimes not even, you don't have to have a very controversial topics, just things very simple, like saying, let's use ta, right? And they go like, why? Like, you should say sta. And then that can be a whole discussion about the pragmatics and why ta is very important because we use all the time. And but I think it's a very complicated time. I don't know if, you know if I see myself as an ally on this, or just, you know, someone that's part of a group that's actually actively trying to change the ways of thinking and of talking. Maybe I'm part of that group, but it's a slow process, I would think. Probably gonna take long time for things to be more inclusive language-wise, and also not just language, but really, right, in the mentality of people. Because I don't want people to address me in a polite way or in a proper way, and then behind my back just trash me. So that doesn't do any good for me, right? I want things to be really genuine, like see me for who I am, or not just me, everybody, right?
Yeah, and I think that's great. The point that Eduardo just mentioned, to think about how people just use some words because they want to be like polite in front of you. And I always like one of the things in language too that I tell my students when they ask me about the proper terms and everything related to that. And I tell them that, for example, do you think the word angel is bad? Is angel bad? You're like, no, angel is good. Say, if you're talking to a friend, say you call them meu anjo, people are not gonna like that, you know, you're in trouble, like you do something, oh, meu anjo, and then you know that this person is saying bad things about you. Say, amiga, is it amiga bad? No, it's very good to be a friend, but you can call somebody amiga and be very offensive. So even like words that we usually don't think of as like having a negative meaning, depending on the way that you use it, your tone, the rhythm and everything, the meaning of those words can change. And then I think in academia, and I'm not gonna talk too much about an institution because this meeting is being recorded and I wanna get in trouble, but some things that I would say is we have a lot now in academia, this politeness in email, that everyone makes a statement, that you have this statement for different university, they see like they just copy and paste it because it's like the same language, the same thing. It's like you have this one person who writes the statements and all the other universities start sharing the statements with the same language because everyone wants to be like polite and use the correct language. But then you see in everyday actions and policies in the university and the way people treat the people who are here in university, it's not matching what's written in those statements. For example, when the assassination of George Floyd happened, there were so many emails that we received with statements from administration and from many people in the universities talking about the importance of anti-racist practices and diversifying the curriculum and all that. And at the same time, they're firing like Black professors and the Department of African Studies. Like there are most of the people who are like they do not have tenure, they're like lecture, they have contracts, they're always like in danger. So at the same time that you have a statement like supporting Blackness and supporting Black people, you are not giving the conditions, the proper conditions for these people to be in the academic environment. The same thing for Black students and the support that we have related to the research we do, especially if you want to research something related to Blackness, Black women and Black trans women and all that, the difficult that it is to even form a committee, to find people who are willing to be part of your advising committee, like to help you with your research and the resources that we have available to complete your research. So I think it's very important for us to think about this. And I think Eduardo pointed this very beautifully. Like, I don't want people to just say nice things to me, like on my face, just because they want to be nice. And then the practice and everything that they do in the background, it's going to be completely different from what it is stated. So it's very important for those things like to match. And the same thing about the use of the pronouns and all that. I don't want you to do that just so you're going to be like, oh, I'm cool, I'm nice, I'm following a trend or something. I'm like it's not about that. So if you do not recognize the importance of the use of the pronouns, it's not a joke. For example, sometimes people say, oh, I need to think about this now and use the pronoun. They say, oh, I'm sorry. And you say that they're not really sorry, but like misusing people's pronouns. So I don't want that to be just because people want to use proper words to show how nice and not racist they are, but actually have practices that's going to show that. And we see that also with the diversity trainings that are becoming very popular now in institutions, that everyone go to those trainings, and now you are certified anti-racist. And then you see that in daily practice, you know how to use the right words, like, oh, what does a bystander mean? What does it take? So you know all the vocabulary, but then in your daily practice, you're not actually putting this into action. So I think it's very important for us to think about this, because even sometimes people will use words that are very racist because a part of the vocabulary, but they're really trying to learn, they're really trying to get better. And then you're going to see people who use this very nice vocabulary that shows like how beautiful the words they can use. But then in daily life, you see that their practice, it's not matching that discourse. So I think having this practice with the language like together, it is very important. And then I think we have a lot of work to do in academia related to that. We have a long road to go. And it's something that those diversity trainings and their certificates, it's not going to do it, because it's an everyday thing. It's a daily and continuous learning process. You cannot become an anti-racist in 2 hours workshops. It's not going to work.
But don't you think, Luana, that, I understand that because your hundreds of years of systemic racism and slavery doesn't disappear on a weekend, right? But don't you think that, and I put that as a question really to you, that sometimes having those 2 hours, right, of conversation, even though knowing that there are huge limitations to it, right? And the certificate doesn't prove anything, right? That you are anti-racist because you got a certificate. But don't you think that perhaps those 2 hours can be a start of something, like start of a brainstorming, of questioning things and trying to open up a little bit, or?
Okay, this video is being recorded again. I don't want to get in trouble. You guys are asking me.
Don't answer.
I just
to answer.
just because nothing that the way the people, I think having this space for conversation, I think it's great. It's very important.
Mm-hmm.
For example, the conversation that we're having here right now, I think it's very important, and we probably learned a lot, and we're gonna get out of here with a lot of more to think about the way that we use the language, the way we behave. I believe the way that diversity has been institutionalized, it is a problem.
Mm-hmm.
And because I do not think that even those 2 hours that you get together, you learn this beautiful vocabulary about like, it's not
Mm-hmm.
just that. So it's not the way that diversity trainings that I experienced, that I even had to go through all of those diversity trainings. I see that the way that it has been institutionalized, I don't see anything good coming out of the way that these trainings, that the way these workshops has been happening. I do believe that conversation is important. I do believe that exchanging ideas and rethinking our practice, it is very important, but the way that it is happening in the institutions, I don't think it is promoting the change that we need.
Yeah, we had so many statements of diversity, right, after George Floyd, and some of them, you would read it and they were too rosé, like the way that they would describe the departments. And some, I thought they were more real. No, they were doing a little bit of a self-reflection too, but it was definitely lacking a plan of action. What is the plan of action here?
Exactly.
What are the tangible things this department is going to do in order to become more inclusive, right? Is that representation of more people of color? Is that a combination of readings that have canonical pieces of literature and also writings from indigenous, Black authors, etc.? Are we talking about reviewing the curriculum, etc., right? But I find that representation is one of the biggest issues, because when you have people of color in the room, and when they are given an opportunity in a position of power as well, the conversation can really start happening if they are also anti-racist, right? If they happen to be both, because it's not always the case either, right?
And also adding a little bit, It has to be a continuous practice too, because I think what the problem with this diversity workshop, you think that those 2 hours is enough. Like I did what I had to do. For example, after the George Floyd, I've never been invited for so many events like last year. I was like popping, everybody discovered that we need to talk about Portuguese, talk about Blackness, to have Black people speaking at conference, at events, and then it stopped. Like this year, it was a completely different year. So it's like I'm still presenting a lot of events, but most of the events that I'm doing are related to Black women collectives and events, things like that. And the same thing now is November. So it's November in Brazil, the Dia da Consciência Negra is coming. And then all those invitations, like, can you come talk at my university? So you just take a picture, have a flyer here. Oh, we have a Black person speaking at this event. But then it's this one thing that happens like, oh, November. And here in the US, so it's like February. And then the year of the assassination of George Floyd, that year, we have this discussion. And then they say, what happened this year? The problem is still there. They're still killing White people just because they're Black. Like people are still experiencing racism. When you think about the language, we still have racist terms in teaching materials. They are teaching Portuguese to people. So we cannot think about this as one day, as one moment. If it's not continuous, it's not going to work. You cannot have a 2-hour workshop and then I'm done. I did what I'm supposed to do. Now it's every day. It's every day. It always had to happen.
Yeah, Luana, you touched on so many things. I wanted to jump in with one thing, which is the risk of performativity. And also, I think there's a tendency where we want to feel like we're trying our best, we're taking a step, that's all that counts, you know. And I think with inclusive language, it's very easy to say, you know, effort is important. Like you said, people will make mistakes, but we appreciate when people try to use the pronouns that somebody prefers. We appreciate when people try to avoid language that's obviously exclusionary. But it's not that you get a gold star just for trying, and that once you've used you know, somebody's they pronouns properly, you can go and vote in a way that discriminates against them, or you can use other kinds of language with your friends that is incredibly transphobic, stuff like that. So I think it's something that those of us in academia have to be very conscious about, because we have sort of this captive audience that we can sort of both teach and also indirectly influence with our practices. But it's also something I tend to be a little bit abrasive with some of my friends, and they'll often say, you know, like, oh, you're so liberal, or, oh, you know, you insist so much on the use of saying, you know, todes. But I think that, like you said, there's such temptation to be satisfied with so little and to give people a pass that oftentimes we do have to be a little bit pushy. And I personally am pretty okay with having that reputation, because I think it's, like you said, there's an urgency to it, and there's a real importance there that sometimes gets erased.
I would like to take that perspective of Mark to make what I think is going to be one of the last questions. But it's, we started this conversation by saying that language is identity, but also power. And I would like to know from you, how do you balance your power, because you have the word, you also have, as Mark said, this audience, with the burden that most of the times people think, oh, you have to educate me because you know what you're talking, you need to represent everybody who is part of the community that you belong. So how do you balance those two roles, and how much damage or good things those roles can bring to your life personally, but also in academia? How does that influence your choices in research, in practice, but also your daily life when you're not in the classroom or, you know, surrounded by those code corridors?
Well, I think that resistance begins in the streets, and not when you spend all of your lives learning from TV and from news and doing workshops and spending the entire time at home. So you actually have to put your hands on the dirt. You have to acknowledge, just like what Mark was saying, acknowledge your limitations. We cannot know everything. That's why we have to learn from, I don't know, times to times. I am not an indigenous person, so sometimes when I have to do research for I don't know, indigenous people, even homosexuality within the indigenous communities, how do I know that? How do I do? So I have to go back to the archive. I have to go back to the libraries and get knowledge. But then the other half of the knowledge is made, again, with the resistance in the streets. You have to go there. And just like, you know, you have to see how people react to things outside the classroom in order to go back to the classroom and try to, as much as possible, to show what is going on. But again, I am not trying to be the voice of different people, because I don't know, because I am, I guess, one of the voices in Portugal, but I am not, for instance, the voice of the Roma people in Portugal, because ethnically it's not my culture. So we both share some kind of, you know, culture, of course, but I do not, I mean, it's not my space. So what do? Instead of making assumptions, instead of creating ideas that I think are true, I have to go there. I have to leave my office, my classroom, my archive, go there and ask questions in order to learn.
And we are not owners of knowledge either, right? So decentralizing knowledge, I think it's important. And that's why I like programs like Teletandem, because you get students to talk one-on-one with another student in the home country, right? And then they will have different perceptions about different things politically and religiously and about gender, but there is a dialogue happening. Just like Carlos was saying, I don't think I can talk in the name of Black people in Brazil. You know, I can't talk about the life of an indigenous person and their experiences, because it's not my place. It's not my lugar de fala, right, necessarily. But I will be an ally, and I will listen to people in general and invite them to the classroom. I think that's very important. Have guest speakers once in a while, have people from different backgrounds and races and social status talking to our students. I think that's very key. That's how I look at it, at least.
Anna, Ronald, any comments on that specific question, which is how do you balance your responsibility, but also burden of being the person who does the work?
I think a good way for balancing is the aquilombamento. I think it's very important to find like people and spaces that you feel safe, that you feel comfortable, that you feel that you have some kind of autonomy. And I think we can create those spaces, like whatever we are, like for example, here in academia, at the University of Pittsburgh, if I see there are things that I'm not able to do, for example, in my classroom and the environment that I am in, so I need to create a space that will give me the possibility of doing that. So that's why for me, this collective, the Poetry Collective, it's a very important space. Here that I started like 5 years ago, because I felt the necessity of having like a place that we can highlight the voice of Black, Indigenous, and the LGBTQI plus community in the university, because sometimes we have such a strict curriculum with so many dates and things that you have to cover. So for many students, it's more important for them to learn the days of the week than discussing the social, cultural, political conditions in Brazil. And then some students, they will be like, I'm here to learn the numbers, to say the days of the week. I'm here to learn the language, and learn the language for them is learning that's like vocabulary, the structure, the difference between said and start. This is the idea that they have for learning a language. So if sometimes it's not possible to bring this conversation in the classroom environment, so the Poetry Collective, my space, like if you come to the meetings of Adverse, that is the space to talk about that, because for us, language, it's not only that. So if you're interested in learning just how to say the difference between say and start, okay, good for you. And here, and in the US academic, you have this culture of the business idea of education, and even thinking about small programs like Portuguese, we cannot afford, and it's literally afford, to lose students. So the students will come to your class and then you, okay, hi everyone, I'm a Black feminist from Brazil. We're going to talk about this. And then the next day you have like 2 students in the class. So we cannot do that. So we have to find a balance like between the students' expectations, administration expectations, and the things we can actually do. So the space, even and if the Poetry Collective is not even outside the institution, it's still part of the institution because we are a student organization. But as a student organization, as a graduate student organization, we have some more freedom to open up the conversation and discussions for this. And then everyone is welcome to come. But when you come, so you read the description. If you go to our social media or Facebook or Instagram, it's there, the description. Adverse is a transnational, multilingual student organization to highlight the voice of Black, Indigenous, LGBTQIA+, communities, artists, poets, and beyond. So you know what to expect, you know what you're coming into. So these spaces are being great, and I think we learn a lot from our ancestors about the importance of aquilombamento, the ginga, like the capoeira, the movements that you go and then you return, you pretend like you going, but you're not. So you need to learn the gingado and learn the ginga to navigate those spaces, and knowing that the real changes, the people who are making changes in the world, they were not locked in a room in front of a computer writing Facebook posts or articles. They are out there with the community, they are organizing, they're getting together, they are collaborating and creating change. I think that's one of the things that is my challenge, is trying to balance this with my academic life, because I think I would have my dissertation perspectives done by now if I was not doing all those other activities. Working with the collective is like working with the Black women in Brazil and organize with poets, creating connections, translating people, getting people. It's like, if I was not doing all that, I think it would be easier like to finish these academic steps related to that. So I think the hard thing for me to find the balance is to learn when to stop to do certain things, so I can finish this because it's an important step. It will give me more opportunities to do the work that I want to do. But to finish this, unfortunately, I have to be out of the community a little bit more to be able to finish those steps that are necessary. So for me, this is a very difficult way to find balance between the community work, organizing, and sitting in front of the computer and writing papers.
Okay, so Ronald?
Yeah, but I would like you to restate your question, please, Michele, because I think you were talking about burden on the one hand, and you related that to the beginning of our conversation, which was about identity and power. So would you mind restating precisely what you were getting at?
Not at all. We established that, of course, although we have those discussions, we are in a position of power because we do have an audience, we have our students, we have a platform, but also sometimes, especially if you are very obviously into a category, for example, oh, you're a woman, or you're a Black woman, or you're a gay Black woman, you know, like you start being pinpoint, and you are put in a position that those are the only topics that you are allowed to talk about and to have an opinion. And that becomes our entire life, but also it is a very powerful position, but also we almost take the burden of representing an entire community that are made of different people. But how does that impact? And that goes as your panelists, your peers were talking, like with your research, with your practice, but also outside academia, in your personal life, how the fact that you have this power, but also burden affect your existence.
Right. Well, our colleagues here today pretty much talked about, you know, what it means to be a teacher or a professor. And we are put in that position all the time. I think I can talk from that standpoint because, yeah, sometimes it takes a lot of work to make or to help people understand that you're not the true holder, right? Or the one that has something to say. So what I try to do in my classrooms, but again, it's I think it's a very particular type of classroom when you talk about graduate or undergraduate students that have pretty much defined their path in a way. And when you're talking about extension classrooms, when you're talking to either teachers or high school and elementary school students, those are for me, very different, areas, let's say, where I can work as a teacher. But sometimes for me, the difficulty is to show the importance of these issues that we're talking about to people that have even more pressing, emergent, or urgent issues like, let's just say, not having food on the table, you know. Then it gets really tough because it can be hard to show to people like that in our reality here in Brazil, which of course, you know, we're in a moment that is like very conservative and very problematic to talk about certain things or to have clear positions about certain things. And that's why I said that I was lucky, because I don't face that on a day-to-day basis, but that is our reality. So when we talk to people that are trying to learn different ways of looking into things in terms of education, especially when we're talking to teachers, it is a tremendous challenge to try to show them the importance of the issues that we're treating here in relation to issues that are more pressing in their day-to-day lives. So if I can use the word burden, I would apply that word to that sort of situation. But in other terms, when we talk about, or when I talk about the difficulty of trying to show people that their voice may matter more than what I have to say as a teacher or a professor, that can be quite difficult too.
Eduardo, you were going to say something before, and sorry I interrupted you. So if you want to say it now, please.
I don't quite remember actually what I was going to say, but I think it was just a joke. I was going to say setting star is pretty hard to teach, you know. It might be the most difficult thing in the world to teach an American student the difference between setting star. No, I concur with my colleagues' comments, you know, that we all come from different paths of life and have different experiences. And as Ronald was saying, you know, living in Brazil is certainly different than teaching Portuguese there than teaching Portuguese here in the US. Yeah, and I think the burden is very different among ourselves here in this group as well. And Luana can probably talk from that first experience with all the invitations after, you know, George Floyd. I got none, you know, who would like to hear from me during that time. But, you know, being a person who would speak for a certain group of people all the time, I think that is really hard. And I don't think it is the obligation of people of color, you know, to explain what racism is or what anti-racism is, and to educate us all the time, and to, you know, tell how we should address people of color. I think, you know, it's an education process we all have to be part of. I agree with the idea of safe spaces. At the same time, you know, you are not going to feel comfortable all the time. And I agree with what Luana was saying, having a different venue to deal with these issues with people that are more like-minded, you know, like-minded. It's great. But at the same time, you also want to talk to people who are not like you, right? Who have very different ways of thinking, who will feel uncomfortable, might get upset, you know. And it's hard to do that when you're looking at numbers as well, right? Luana was very right about that. You don't want to upset students. You have a student evaluation at the end of the quarter. You want to make sure they are there, right? But I'm trying to find the balance, because I don't think being quiet in a classroom, it's doing for me anymore. You know, like there was a time that I would not try to be controversial, you know, and that was me a few years ago. Now, if I hear a homophobic comment or something that's straight up racist, I don't want to humiliate people, but at the same time, I want to think about that, how I'm going to address that issue in the classroom to make sure that we are all growing from this with compassion. You know, I want to be compassionate with people, but I don't want to let just ignorance flow around the room like it's nothing, you know. I don't think that's being inclusive. I think we have to have a stand. And it's hard, you know, because then people will not like you all the time. And
it's not a job of being liked, is it? And we want and we need, because as you said, of the numbers, but it is a tough job. I just would like to point out to everyone who's here that on our chat, there are lots of resources. And we are going to, I assume, Mark, going to be sharing those resources as well with everyone. And it's 6:01, and I'm gonna give the word to Mark so he can send us out. Otherwise, I feel like we can stay here until 10 p.m. just talking about this and never stop. So I would like to thank one more time everyone who came today and who attended today, especially our panelists, and also the invitation to moderate this conversation. So thank you, everyone. Mark, you have the mic.
Thanks, Michelle. I'll keep it short and sweet and just say once again, thanks to everybody who came. The video will go up on the webpage, and I'll also make sure to grab the resources out of the chat. I've already been adding a couple sort of as we've been talking, but if you, any of you panelists have recommendations of things we didn't talk about, links that you think might be helpful that you'd like to share, please feel free to send those my way. And I'll make sure that they get up for everybody to access. So yeah, I'd just like to thank everybody again. The conversation was very rich and interesting and went in all kinds of directions I didn't always expect it would, which is part of the beauty of talking about topics like this, is that there's so many angles that you can approach. So thanks everybody for sharing your expertise. And yeah, there's plenty more to say. So maybe we'll just have to have a follow-up panel at some point in the near future. Thanks everybody.
Thank you. Nice to meet you.
Thank you all.
Thank you. Obrigada.
Obrigado, Marco.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Tchau.
Ciao.